It is not a lack of love, but a lack of friendship that makes unhappy marriages. Friedrich Nietzsche. Man, that's a good one.
Are you ready to make the most of the only life you have? To make smart money choices focused on achieving what you care about most? Here to help you balance living well today without sacrificing your tomorrow is the Retirement Answer Man, Roger Whitney.
So my wife and I are in one of those danger zones when it comes to marriage. Now, we've been married 27 years, 28 years this coming October. What I mean by that is we are in that zone where our kids have left the house, they've graduated high school, and they're starting their academic and professional careers, which means our role as a parent, for the most part, has been fulfilled. And traditionally, I've seen that as a danger zone for marriages. Many unhappy marriages will get to this point so they can raise their kids and have that two-parent household. And this is the first chance of reevaluating, hey, we've done our job as a parent. I can hang my head high. Now, is this what I want? Is this who I want to spend the rest of my life with? It's a question that gets asked often when you're entering empty nesthood. Now, I don't have any statistics, but I do have a lot of practical experience in walking life with clients and having friends like you have friends, and it's something that I've noticed. I could probably name on one or two hands all the couples I know that are either going through issues or actually getting divorced that are in this stage. Another inflection point for marriages is when the couples retire. Now, retiring from full-time work, that role being fulfilled, like the kid role, all of a sudden, the attention turns inward even more on who I am spending the rest of my life with. Decades ago, the calculus kept people in their marriages for the most part. I got 8 more years with this person. Now, when people retire, and let's say at age 60, the calculus has changed. Now it's, do I want to spend my next 30 years with that person sitting over there? The person that I may not know very well anymore. That is some of the calculations going on in people's heads when they retire, if they're married, or it can be. Now, statistically, over the last 25 years, the divorce rate for people over 50 has more than doubled. And for those over 65, it has roughly tripled. Bam! It's happening. So as part of this retirement equation, we got to figure out, how do we make our marriages thrive, assuming you're married, in retirement so you don't become a statistic and you don't become lonely in retirement because your whole social network has blown up. So we're going to talk about that a little bit in the Hot Topic segment today, and then talk a little bit about bond investing in the practical planning with our awesome friend Nicole. But we can't do any of that until, we have that all important disclaimer. All right, the disclaimer is very simple, and that is, don't take advice from me on the show. Helpful hints and education, yes. But advice, no. I don't know you. I don't know anything about you. I only give advice to clients that I work for as a fiduciary. And when it comes to marriage, I've been married 27 years, but I am no expert. Trust me, I am a major work in progress, probably like you. So before you make any decisions, talk to your legal advisor, your financial advisor, your tax advisor, your marital advisor, and think of this as helpful hints in education. Now let's go figure out, how do we make marriage and retirement be a blessing? Happy spouse, happy retirement, happy life, really, right? So if you are married and have been married, how do you make your marriage thrive even later in life so the two of you can have the kind of retirement that you want? Well, first off, it's really important that you do. Well, from a financial perspective, I always say divorce later in life is one of the biggest financial disasters you can have. That's why investing in your marriage is probably one of the better investments you can do. You get divorced later in life after you've already accumulated your retirement accounts, your home, your property, your benefits. Well, half of that will be yours after retirement, or maybe less than half. And you still have to set up your own brand new household. On the other end, your social network that you and your spouse have built up over years, you want to talk about a major cost. You get divorced, your social network blows up and you got to start from scratch or near it. It's just a bad thing. And there are a lot of benefits to having very healthy marriages. I was reading a Harvard article on the health.harvard.edu blog. I'll put a link to it in Six Shot Saturday. But according to almost every study, people in happy marriages, they live longer. They have fewer strokes and heart attacks. They have a lower chance of depression, a better chance of recovering after major operations. People in happy marriages are less likely to have advanced cancer at the time of diagnosis, and they're more likely to survive. Now, all of these benefits come from healthy relationships or marriages, but it's clear if you can build a healthy marriage, you're probably going to live a lot healthier and be a lot happier. So it behooves you to be very intentional about that. We're going to talk a little bit about how to do that. But before we do, let's set up why do marriages degrade over time? I've been married 27 years, as I had stated, and a lot of it has to come down to the law of familiarity. So in a marriage, what is the law of familiarity? The more time I spend with my wife, the wonderful Shauna, the more familiar the whole relationship becomes. And the more familiar the whole relationship becomes, the less excited about it I become. Now, I say I as in you or me. It's just natural that when you become very familiar with something, what you do is you unintentionally dismiss all the greatness and focus on the one or two annoyances. It's a natural thing that anyone does in any kind of relationship. I see that in relationships with clients, with coworkers, with friends, with my children. Because we're so familiar, we lose and we just take for granted all the good stuff. And then what can happen is the other thing, right? The grass is always greener. We see whether it's on TV or in relationships, that could be so much nicer because it's not as familiar. So that is a natural flow in relationships that we have to battle against. Now, especially as you get older in life and have been married for a while, because we have other things that are dangers to longer marriages. You have past failures of who you were as a spouse that you still hold regret for, failures of your spouse that you still have not forgiven completely. Those can tarnish longer relationships. You have physical changes to yourself. I definitely have changed physically over 27 years. And physical changes to your spouse that can affect your own self-image, but also the self-image of your partner. You're used to spending time together, but not together, right? Because you have so much going on. You have kids, you have work, you have all these distractions, and you come together at very small periods of time during the day. So it's easy to let things slide. And that's one of the reasons that retirement's a inflection point, is because all of a sudden those distractions go away and you are there with the other person. And then another danger of a long marriage as you get closer to retirement is if you're not truly walking hand in hand about what your vision, your shared vision of the future is, it's easy to drift apart mentally. And then when you get to retirement, each partner has a different view, radically different view in some cases, of what they want retirement to look like. And if they hadn't talked about them, if they hadn't had those little conversations, then that could be a big conversation of how do we reconcile this, or do we? I know I've gotten myself in a pickle when I have not been intentional about communicating well with my spouse. For the most part today, I want to bring this issue up because I don't have fully formed answers for you. I was hoping to have an interview done for this show with Dan and Joanne Miller, who have been together 50 plus years, and they have one of the most alive marriages at age 70 that I've ever seen. But I do think the solution comes down to intentionality. We talk about smart sprints when it comes to our cash flow or our investing or our net worth. I think we need to have smart sprints when it comes to our marriage, about having fun together, about having sex together, about being appreciative of the other person, which is usually the best way to start. If you feel like you're in a funk in a relationship, start by only being appreciative about the other person, because it changes the entire dynamic of how you think of that person. When you start to reconnect with all the things that you appreciate about them, learn to have fun together and create some common interests. Learn to give space so the other person can pursue their interests as well, because a fully formed person is always a better spouse. So I wanted to bring this topic up, and I apologize if you feel like I don't have the solutions for you. Well, I don't. I'm working on it too, but I think a key to the solution is the intentionality about making a better relationship and fighting against the law of familiarity. Because if you've been married a long time and you're getting closer to retirement, this is going to be one of the keys, if not the key, to the excitement and the happiness of that retirement. So that's why we talk about it with clients, and that's why we're talking about it here. I would love your feedback on little tips that you have, things that you do to create an amazing marriage. In fact, go ahead and email those to Nicole at wwkwealth.com. I didn't tell her I was going to do this, so she may get lots of emails, which is awesome because she loves them. And maybe we can let's compile a list of best practices on how to create a great marriage. And I'll have her put that in 6-Shot Saturday so you can respond right there. But I think this is really important. As crazy as the markets are right now, you know what? This is still more important. So I look forward to hearing that. Now let's go chat with Nicole and answer some of your listener questions. Hey, welcome to the Practical Planning segment, the Valentine's Day edition, which is Nicole's favorite holiday. Right, Nicole?
No.
Okay. Hey, Nicole, why did the man send his wife's Valentine through Twitter?
Why?
Because she is his tweetheart.
Ha ha, you're so funny.
I know this is not your favorite holiday, so I'm going to tweak you on that a little bit. What kind of Valentine's Day candy is never on time?
What kind?
Chocolate.
I should have you write the lunchbox jokes for my son.
There you go. Hey, I got one more for you. What did pilgrims give each other on Valentine's Day?
What?
Mayflowers. Of course, I am reading these from some site on Fun Kid Jokes, funkidjokes.com, the Valentine's Day edition. And I figured that would maybe get you into the mood a little bit for this momentous
Yeah, you
day.
should read them to your own kids and see how they go over.
Yeah, my 20 and 21-year-old. They would love those.
Love it.
So to segue from that to some, very nerdy questions about investing, which is probably a good thing to get into right now because the markets definitely don't want to make anybody their Valentine Day sweetheart, given the volatility that we've seen. So what do we got on store for us today?
Well, our first question today is from Robert, and it's about the super romantic topic of bonds.
Oh.
He says, almost everyone talks about the importance of balancing investment accounts by having a certain percentage of stocks versus bonds, depending on your age and other circumstances. Almost no one ever explains what type of bonds they're referring to. Assuming that I want to stick to bond mutual funds rather than individual bonds, are we talking about bonds that invest in tax-exempt municipal bonds or funds that invest in taxable corporate bonds? For purposes of balancing risk, does it matter?
Well, the simple answer to your question, Robert, is it's perfectly fine to use some diversified portfolio to implement the bond portion of your allocation. And it makes sense in a post-tax account to use something that uses municipal bonds because you'll get some tax benefit there. And then in your pre-tax accounts to use taxable bonds, which is usually the Lehman Barclays aggregate index, some portfolio based off of that type of index, to get that bond stock allocation of whatever asset allocation you're trying to implement. I like the last part of your question. You say for the purposes of balancing risk, because that's really one of the roles of bonds in a portfolio. So to get to the question behind the question in terms of what role do bonds play, beyond just simply what do you use? Yeah, just use a diversified portfolio, one that's, tax and cost efficient. But why are we using bonds in the first place? And I think this is really important. And I could easily go down a very deep hole here, Nicole, a rabbit hole. So you're going to have to sort of be guardrails that I don't go too deep and get lost in my own thoughts. Okay. So Nicole's giving me the signal that she will give me hey, stop going so deep. But let's talk about asset classes and asset allocation here a little bit. And this will give you some context for how to think about bonds. So since 1926, so from 1926 to 2016, this is all sourced from Morningstar, small company stocks have had an average return of about 12% per year. Now, obviously, it doesn't happen every year. There's volatility there, but that's been the average return since 1926. Large company stocks, using the S&P 500, has had an average return since 1926 of about 10%. Not bad. And bonds, and we'll just use the government bond index that Morningstar sourced, has had an average return since 1926 to 2016 of 5.5%. So you can see stocks give you higher returns, and as you get to less volatile assets, the average return goes down. Now, returns, those are gross returns. Now, we have inflation that eats away at returns, right? Because that's the natural flow of prices increasing. So we have to back out inflation to get to what we call real returns, which are returns that are equivalent from a spending dollar standpoint. So if you back out inflation from these long-term averages, small cap stocks had a real return, which is the return minus the average inflation of 9.2%, still pretty respectable. Large company stocks, a real return of 7.1%, and government bonds, a real return of about 2.6%. So when you back out the average inflation over this very long period of time, you're like, on the surface, why would you ever invest in bonds that give you a real return of 2.5% when you can get 7 or 9% average over the long term in stocks? I mean, it wouldn't make sense. But, we all know the other side, which is volatility, right? Stocks can bounce all over the place, and bonds historically are a lot more stable in terms of the ups and downs that we have to feel. So what are the roles of bonds in a portfolio? Well, number one is the role is they provide income, right? They throw off a yield or interest rate, and we get to take that money and reinvest it or spend it. And then the second role of bonds is as a ballast to the portfolio. It provides much more stability to a portfolio during the turmoils of markets, or like we're seeing now. So let me give you an example of that ballast effect. So if we look at, say, a portfolio, an allocation of 80% in stocks, 20% in bonds. From 1950 to December of 2015, this is sourced from Ibbotson. If we look at rolling 1-year periods, so that's from 1950 to December 2015, there were 780 1-year periods if you take it as a rolling period. So it's like January to January, February to February, and so forth. So you get a lot of data points there. A little geeky there. A portfolio, Nicole's saying, yeah, it is a little bit. But anyway, it gives you more data to make it a little bit more robust. A portfolio that had 80% in equities, represented by the S&P 500, and 20% in bonds, the Barclays aggregate, had an average return during that period of about 11.1% of 1-year returns. That's the average 1-year return you could have received. The worst 1-year return during that period was negative 33.6%. You lost a third of your money. Now compare that to a 60% stock portfolio with 40% in bonds. The average return for those 1-year periods was 9.9%. Not that far off the 11.2, but The worst 1 year period was negative 23.9. You didn't give up a lot in potential average return, but you had a lot less volatility. And that's the role traditionally that bonds are supposed to play. So I wanted to give you that background as to why bonds are even in a portfolio in an asset allocation approach. Now, what's typically used in allocation models is usually we're using something based off of the Barclays Aggregate Index, which is this, it's like the S&P 500 for bonds. It is something that represents the total bond market, and that is considered the benchmark. So if we look at the Barclays Aggregate Index, which is the bond benchmark, right now it has a trailing 12-month yield of about 2.38%. So that's the interest that you're going to get off of a bond, or the index right now. And it's going to have a portfolio of government bonds, corporate bonds, mortgage bonds, all types of bonds. And it will have what's called a duration, and we've talked about that before, which is like an average maturity of about 5.91 years. And that might be important when we get to something later. But that's typically what's used in asset allocation models. So now we know, okay, why we don't just own stocks, even though the returns are a lot higher. We understand that bonds, that the returns from bonds typically come from income, but they can come from appreciation as well. Now, the question is, Robert, to that last question of balancing risk in a portfolio, is what implementation considerations do we have currently? Because all asset allocation models are based on all these really long-term averages, and they assume you're a long-term investor and that you're invested in the averages will have time to play themselves out. But here's the problem with statistics is we don't live in the long term. We're not going to live in a period from 1926 to 2016 from an investment horizon to hopefully have time for those averages to actually work their way out. So when we think of implementing an asset allocation, it's really important that we incorporate a lot of other things as well. So one you've brought up, which is post-tax and pre-tax accounts. And you're correct. It makes sense to consider municipal portfolios in your post-tax account and not in your pre-tax account. But one of the bigger implementation considerations right now is the season that we're in and that we've been in from an interest rate environment. So in the early 1980s, back when, Nicole, when were you born? Can I ask you that question? Can I ask you that question on air? 1983. Oh,
1983 is when I was
my
born.
Lord. Okay. Back in the way back days when Nicole was a wee little one, interest rates peaked just over 15%. And they're at about 2. Yeah. So you could get, Nicole, a mortgage back then, if you had a mortgage rates were like 13, 14% on a mortgage. Do you know the mortgage?
Oh my gosh.
I think the mortgage on my house right now is 3.75. And when I bought my first house in 1991, I think it was 9 3/4. So since you were a wee little lady, interest rates have had this long march down to near zero. And what happens with fixed income is when interest rates go down, you're getting the interest from all the bonds, but the value of those bonds appreciate. They go up. So if you look at a 30-year period, the returns on bonds, because of this decreasing in interest rates, has rivaled the return on stocks. It's sort of been the best of both worlds. We've had great stock market, but we've had an amazingly great bond market because of this. And that high in the 80s was that I can see the all-time high of interest rates in the country, at least in modern history. And now we're at all-time lows in modern history of interest rates. So we've had this huge tailwind of interest rates decreasing that have really given us the best of both worlds. Great income from fixed income, but also appreciation as well. Well, now, how much farther could interest rates go down? We've already almost been to zero, and we're actually flattened out and at least recently started to see the Federal Reserve and interest rates start to rise, which if you've ever ridden a bicycle and you're riding with the tailwind and you got this wind pushing you at your back, you feel really fast and it's easy. And then when you turn around and you start to come back and the wind is in your face, all of a sudden it's really hard and you go it's a lot slower. And that could be what we're in for when it comes to bonds, because as interest rates start to rise, the value of bonds in a portfolio that you own or an index that you own go down, which means we may be in a season, if we even just normalize interest rates, that you're not going to see really any return on bonds, or you could actually see negative return on bonds. Does that make sense, Nicole? She is my geek alert indicator when I look at her face as we're talking.
It makes sense. So, but I guess I do have a question. If bonds returns are so low, does it still make sense to allocate part of your portfolio to them as you're getting older?
That's a good question. So let's go back to that Lehman Barclays aggregate index. So that is an index right now. So that's the benchmark of what someone might use in a portfolio, either through an ETF or a mutual fund or something. And if you're supposed to have 40% of your portfolio in bonds, let's say you just use the index. So that index, or you use something that you can't invest in an index, but you use a vehicle that can. So if you use that vehicle and that mirrors the Lehman aggregate, the interest rate you're going to get is about 2.38%. But what happens is when interest rates go up, the value of that portfolio could go down. In the way, and I've talked about this before, the way to get an idea of how much it could go down is, investment professionals use this term called duration, which is like the average maturity of the portfolio. So the duration of the Lehman aggregate that I'm looking at online is about 5.9 years. So the rule of thumb is if interest rates go up by 1%, the value of a bond portfolio should go down by about the amount of its duration. So let me say that in a different way. If interest rates go up by 1%, the value of the Lehman aggregate, according to this duration rule, the value of the portfolio would go down by 5.9%. So if you think we're in an interest rate rising environment and we have interest rates go up by 1%, you've just wiped out all of your interest that you've received and may be at a loss. As an example, the Lehman aggregate peaked in July of 16 from a price standpoint, if you get a chart on it. Since then, it's down about 5.3% to today's value whenever we're recording this. I think it's Thursday? So if you bought the Lehman aggregate in July of 2016, likely, you got your interest rate of about 2-something%, but you're probably flat or at a loss today because interest rates have gone up. So that's a really good question. From an asset allocation standpoint, that doesn't matter because it's looking at the long-term statistical nature of things. But that's looking at the long-term environment. It's not looking at the season that we happen to be in. And that's where it gets really problematic from an implementation standpoint. So that sort of begs the question, does buying more bonds, quote unquote, safen up your portfolio? From a pure asset allocation standpoint, it does, because then all you do is you rebalance year by year and it'll all work out in the end. So what do you do? Well, we're going to answer one more question and then I'm going to give you some general comments of why this question is so important for you, assuming that you're approaching or in retirement, because it's a lot more nuanced than simply what the models say. But before I do that, let's get on to the next question because I think it's related, Nicole.
It sort of is. It sort of has to do with models. So it's actually a question from Jay. And Jay writes in, I have finally wised up to the wisdom of low-cost investing after making years of poor decisions and mistakes with investment advisors selling expensive funds, insurance products, and high-fee annuities. What are your thoughts on having a portion of one's portfolio, say 15 to 20%, in a robo account with Fidelity, Vanguard, or Schwab?
Well, I think, low cost investing, and we've talked about that before, it is about controlling costs and getting, value for what you're paying for. So it sounds like you may have hired advisors that were less focused on helping you make better decisions and they were more focused on beating the markets or whatever. Now, in terms of your question of putting 15 to 20% in a robo, well, what does a robo do? A robo, so for those of you who might not know, a robo advisor are some of these basically computer programs. You answer some questions, those risk tolerance questionnaires, which we've talked about before, and they say, this is what your risk level is. And then based on what you're scored on your risk tolerance questionnaire, they put you into a fixed asset allocation, stocks, bonds. Some get more fancy than others in terms of how many different little asset classes they have in their pie chart. And then they put your money into that portfolio and then they rebalance very systematically. So does that make sense for 15 to 20% of your account? I have no clue. I think what leads you to that would be, what are you trying to accomplish from an asset, from a whole balance sheet perspective? If you are a true believer in strict asset allocation, it might be appropriate for 100% of your portfolio that's invested long term, because it can be super efficient and fairly low cost if it fits what you're trying to accomplish from a life perspective. So I think putting 15 to 20% in something that is automated, it may make sense depending on what you're doing with the rest of the money. I don't know if I'm answering your question well enough, Jay, but I think something that you should consider is that many of us start from a tactical standpoint. We go straight to a very specific tactical question that we have, and we try to figure out the answer to that specific tactical question. And that usually leads, in my opinion, to poor decision making, because it doesn't take into the context of who Jay is and where Jay's at and what he wants to accomplish and what his entire financial picture looks like. I think a better decision making comes from following a process that starts from high up and works its way down to the tactical. And if you do the higher up stuff of what Jay wants to accomplish from a life perspective, where he's at, what his cash flow looks like, what his entire net worth looks like, when you start to get down to the tactical, if you go through those bigger steps first, the tactical stuff ends up getting a lot easier to figure out. So I think my suggestion to you would be is usually it's the tactical that makes us address an issue, but once it brings up the issue, we still need to step back and work back down to that issue rather than trying to tackle it right there. Does that make sense, Nicole? You're my ballast here. Am I sailing straight?
You're sailing straight.
So in the context of Jay and Robert's questions, and especially in the context of recent markets, I put together just some few comments and that might help with this perspective. So some general comments about investing when we're trying to allocate assets. You know, this show is called what, Nicole? Do you remember?
The Retirement Answer Man.
Right. So we're talking with people that are over 50 that are working on transitioning or living in a life of more freedom. You know, the word is retirement, but retirement is, probably not the best term for it. And there is a difference when you're investing between asset accumulation and retirement investing, right? If you're a wee young lady like Nicole, who was born when I was a sophomore in high school, investing is a lot easier, right? Because asset allocation works extremely well for these young people like Nicole because they...
Youngish. I don't know that I'm young.
Because when you're young and you have such a long timeline, your investing allows you to take advantage of time because you have decades before you're ever going to need the money. Take advantage of volatility because the ups and downs don't hurt you because you're not selling. In fact, you get to take advantage of the ups and downs because you're likely systematically buying or investing through 401ks or other ways because you're in your earnings years and you haven't even hit your peak earnings years. Well, you have with me, but other than that. So the averages actually have time to work out, and asset allocation works really well for younger folks. But those rules change when you're entering your mid-50s and entering the time when you're slowing down your work and you're slowing down your earnings and everything else. The whole dynamic changes. And a lot of our industry today still wants to apply strict asset allocation to a period of time when the attributes that make it work are all going away. Because what's happening when you're slowing down your working life and trying to live a life of more freedom? Well, you're going to stop or slow down your savings, right? Well, that means you don't take advantage of buying low. You're likely going to draw from your assets rather than save. You're going to take money out, which means you're going to have to keep more cash reserves, which means you have less invested. Or if you're systematically selling, well, now when you have bad markets, you're going to have to sell at lower prices, and that can dramatically impact your performance over time. And your time frame from an investment volatility standpoint is much more compressed. So think about a 60-year-old. So a 60-year-old has a 50-50 chance of living past 90 the last time I checked, but let's just assume they live to 90. Well, the first 10 years, so they have a 30-year investment time frame until they die. But really, it's the first 5-10 years that are critical because that's when they're probably spending the most. They still have the longest time frame, and volatility can drastically impact the success or failure of whatever plan they have put together. So when you think from an investment standpoint, if you're in your mid-50s or 60, volatility is really critically important. So applying a strict asset allocation and just betting on long-term averages, it may work out depending on what seasons we're in these different asset classes, but let's talk about bonds. Go back to Robert's question. Well, what if you're 60 and you're supposed to have 40% of your assets in bonds, but we just happen to be in a season where we're at basically zero interest rates and potentially in a rising interest rate environment? You may have a really dry season or a wicked season in something that's supposed to be your ballast. Now, what is the answer to all this? I'm not going to tell you that I have it. I think part of the answer is you got to use the science of asset allocation, but there's a lot of art that you have to apply, especially when you're dealing with someone later in life. Because we didn't even talk about some of the other problematic issues of asset allocation in retirement, which is the emotional change that happens to us that many of us don't realize happens in the view of risk in life because we're not growing financially. Most of us have spent decades getting the next job, getting an increase, seeing our everything go up, having fulfillment because we're adding to our investment portfolio and building our wealth. Well, when you retire, a lot of that emotional tailwind of growth goes away because we're not adding to the accounts. We don't have the next promotion or the next bonus coming. We're starting to value and think about other things. And emotionally, that can make market volatility and seeing that happen to our accounts much more impactful to us from an emotional level, which a lot of us underestimate. So in my mind, I don't have the answer, but I think the framework is to get to how should you invest is you have to start with a process that is focused on your entire situation. What is the life that you want to live? Where are your risks and opportunities in income? How do you allocate not just your investment account, but how do you make decisions on your entire balance sheet, all focused on achieving the life that you want in these years of more freedom? And that is a process. It's not a product and it's not a allocation. It's lots of little decision. Ultimately, you know what it is, Nicole?
What?
It's change management. It's about change management, not just on your investment, but everything within its context. And that means there are no promises other than the promise, hopefully, for yourself that you implement or with whoever you work with, the promise of a process that you try to follow consistently just to make good decisions. And I think that's what gets us through. And that's the only thing we can hold on to during turbulent times is that we're paying attention to the right things and trying to make the best of all the little decisions that present themselves to us. How is that, Nicole? Was that a little preachy?
You were impassioned.
But it makes sense to me anyway. I mean, we just try to make the best that we can. Okay. So excuse me if I got my soapbox out a little bit there, but it's very difficult to answer tactical questions. And I think it's always the promise of process. Okay. I almost got the soapbox back out. So what are you guys doing?
Let's put the soapbox away and maybe get the Happy Lab out.
Okay. Let's go to the Happy Lab. Hey, welcome to the Happy Lab Valentine's Day edition. So we're struggling with this one, Nicole and I are, because Valentine's isn't necessarily our awesomely favorite holiday, but it is my word to celebrate this year. So how do you make this an amazing day and be happy with it? The key is, I think, is know what your spouse values from you. Yeah, it could be those earrings or the golf club, or it could be
the hunting trip.
The hunting trip in Nicole's case. Her husband goes hunting on Valentine's Day before kids. It could be, like in my case, my wife, she really values getting a card and something small. So she's not a big gift person, but I've realized over the years that what she likes from me is a card with some personal words from me. So I make sure I give that to her because that's her language that responds to her. So I think the key to be happy, whether it's in Valentine's Day or any day, is remember when you're going towards the one you love, it's not about what you want to give them. Think about what they need to receive from you, because that's what's really going to be impactful. And you know what they say, happy wife, happy life. Or in your case, happy husband, happy life, right? It works both ways.
I think it applies both ways. I also say happy boss, happy life. So.
Dang straight on that one, Skippy. All right, let's go set a smart sprint.
On your marks, get set.
And we're off to set a 7-day smart sprint to creating a better life. So this episode was about marriage, about how having a happy spouse makes a happy retirement. So I think in the next 7 days, I want you to noodle on, maybe journal on, what is it that your spouse needs from you? And then each day when you come home, maybe before you're getting out of the car or as someone's walking in the door, think about reading them in the first 5 minutes and saying, what do they need from me today? That might help you have a happy spouse. Hey, Nicole.
Hey, Roger.
I know what one of your favorite things every weekend is.
Coffee on Saturday morning.
Coffee on Saturday morning and reading Six Shot
Saturday.
Now, even though you contribute to it and sometimes you co-opt it, don't think I haven't noticed, because you take what what is there and every now and then it's like, where did that come from?
I don't know anything about that.
But I enjoy reading it and I enjoy the responses and the conversation that we get from our listeners.
That's the best part for sure.
So if you haven't signed up for 6 Shots Saturday, give it a try. It's a very short, quick email with 6 quick tips on how to live a great life and a little summary of the show. And we share exclusive resources and we start some great conversations. So if you haven't, go to rogerwhitney.com. I think towards the bottom, you can enter your name and email and get a weekly dose of retirement wisdom with your coffee on Saturday morning. Happy Valentine's Day, Nicole.
Happy Valentine's Day, Roger.
We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of Retirement Answer Man. Be sure to visit rogerwhitney.com/answers to access the Retirement Answer Library with over 30 checklists to help you make the most of the only life you have. Remember, you have more power than you realize to create an amazing life starting today with Retirement Answer Man. The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Have a wonderful day.